In this lesson, we're going to continue with our Excel study and talk about charts. And in this particular lesson, we're going to talk about creating charts from the beginning, from scratch, and then some different types of charts that might be helpful. So we'll start off with chart construction, talk about the tools you have available to you, and then we'll get into the different types of charts that are available to you within Microsoft Excel. All right, so this is a data set that Mr. Hill gave me that we're just going to work with for the sake of this exercise. And let's say that for the sake of this first attempt, I want to just do a chart where I'm going to graphically represent these 5 cells, which are the 5 runs that comprise trial 1. Number of ways I can represent this visually, but the first thing I would do is start off by highlighting the data. You don't necessarily have to, but this is, I think, the fastest way to do it. So I'm going to start off with highlighting those 5 cells, and then I'm going to go up to my ribbon and click Insert, and then under Insert, let's say that I'm going to start off with a column chart, fairly straightforward type of chart. So I'll click on Column, and you'll see it gives me a number of different options depending on what I'm looking for. And what's nice about Excel is that as you roll over the different options, it gives you a preview of what that chart is going to look like with your data below. So if I go through and I think, well, I'm not so sure about this, or I'm not so sure about that, I can pick based on what I see. So I'm just going to start with a very simple 2-dimensional clustered column chart. So I'll select that one. Okay, and here's the data. Right, it automatically picks an axis scale for me, so it does that automatically, which is nice. I can change that if I want, but it does give us a nice range to begin with. Now, there's a couple things that I might want to change. First of all, I don't have a lot of information here about the chart itself. Right, it just says chart title for my title. If I'm not familiar with the experiment, I don't necessarily know what these units are, and I have a very basic kind of unhelpful label for my columns. So how do we affect that? Okay, well, first of all, if I want to change something textual on the chart, like chart title, I'm just going to double click on it, and you'll see that that highlights title, and it brings up this little box around it. And now I can work with this text. So I can highlight it, and I can just say trial 1 results just by typing it. If I wanted to mess with this further, I could, and we'll get into that in the next lesson, but for now, we'll just leave it as it is. If I want to add a title to either axis, I can do that by going up here to my ribbon. Now, you'll notice that when I'm working with a chart, up in the ribbon, there's these 2 additional tabs that aren't normally there. And these are called contextual tabs because they show up in the context of working with a chart. If you're working with a chart and all of a sudden you see that these disappear, probably what happened is you accidentally clicked away from the chart. So if I just click on the workbook, those tabs go away because Excel is assuming, well, you're not working with the chart anymore, so you don't need those chart tools. So if those go away, just click back on the body of your chart and they'll come back. Okay, so within my chart tools contextual tab, I have this design tab. And all the way on the left, I can click Add Chart Element. It gives me a number of things that I can add. One of those things are axis titles. So if I want a title on the vertical axis, right, I will just choose Primary Vertical. And you'll see, again, it gives me a very generic just axis title. So like I did for the chart title, I'm going to double-click, use my backspace key, get rid of that text, and I'll just put in seconds. Oops. There we go. And that's the unit that I'm working in. Again, if I want to manipulate the way this looks, I can do that, and we'll talk about that in the next lesson. If I want to add a label for the bottom here, I can do that as well. So I could go up, Add Chart Element, Axis Titles, Primary, Horizontal, same deal. So I can just put Run, and that gives me a nice title for Run. Okay. Now, if I want to give more meaningful labels to my columns, this would probably work, right? Because you've got run, and then run 1, run 2, run 3, and so forth. But if I wanted to be more specific, in this case, I actually have to go affect the data a little bit. So when I want to go into the nuts and bolts, the actual data itself of the chart, and go up here to my Design tab, go towards the right and choose Select Data. And under select data, there's a few things we can do over here that we'll talk about later. But if I want to do some new axis labels, I'll go over here to where it says horizontal axis labels and choose edit. Now, if I want to type these in myself, I'm just going to separate them with commas. So if I want to do run 1, run 2, run 3, run 4, and run 5, easy as that, I can hit OK, and you'll see that that shows up down here. What's even handier is if you have those labels somewhere on the workbook, as we do here. Right? We have a row that has those labels in them. I can actually pull these right from the workbook. So I can go back to edit, and instead of typing this in myself, just like we had done with formulas and equations, I'm going to have my blinking cursor here, and I'm just going to highlight the cells that have the labels I want to use, and then click OK, and then they show up here. All right, so then I'll click OK, and there's my chart. Now, let's say that I want to add some scope to this chart. I want to make it broader in terms of the data it includes. I want to also have the data, let's say, from trial 2. Again, I'm going to go up here to select data. Under select data, right now I only have one data series, meaning I only have one set of data, right? And in that case, it's these 5 cells. If I want to change that, I'm going to add a second series, and that second series will show up here as a second set of columns. So I'll just go to add. I can call the series whatever I want. Let's say in this case I'm going to call this one trial 2. And for series values, I'm just going to get rid of what's in there. Again, highlight my data, click OK, and there's my second series. And this is, I have trial 2 for the second series. I can go up here, edit, and make this trial 1. And then I can do the same thing for the third trial. All right, I can call this trial 3. Highlight what I want. Now I've got all 3 trials reflected down here. All right. Just in general, if you want to make the chart larger or smaller, you can move it around just by clicking anywhere on the chart area. And really you can tell you're in the right spot if you see the cursor that I have now, where it's the arrow but then the little compass behind it. So if I want to move this over here, I can do that. If I want to make the chart bigger, you'll see around the edges of the chart I've got these little squares, and that will move the chart, either make it bigger vertically or make it bigger horizontally. What I strongly recommend is that you use the corners, because that's going to keep the scale intact. If I just use the side, you'll see it makes it longer, kind of changes the size of my columns, might not be what I want. If I go here, it keeps everything nice and in scale, and that makes it a lot easier to manage, and you know everything is going to look the same way it did. It's just going to be bigger. All right, with something like a column chart, something that I think is helpful is what are called data labels, where you'll actually add labels on each column that'll tell you the exact value that it represents. So you can kind of eyeball some of these up and guess what the values are, but you might want to actually have the value there. So once again, I'm going to go up to my design tab, add chart element, choose data labels, and you'll see I can have them either in the center of the column. And once again, that preview is really helpful because you can see how they look. In the center, inside end, so on the top but inside base down here, or outside end. And outside end is, as you can imagine, probably the most useful. And that'll give me some data labels outside. All right. So that's my chart, and again, in the next lesson, we'll get into some more of the advanced formatting. But for now, that gives you an idea of how to build the chart from scratch. Now, let's say you get this far and you say, you know, I really don't want to have my data as a column chart. I would rather have it as a line chart. You don't have to necessarily build the whole thing from scratch. What you can do is just go up here to Design, and under Design, go to Change Chart Type, and that'll give you a number of different types of charts. So on the left here in this column, you've got a set of sort of categories, right? Just like we saw when we picked the column chart, there's different kinds of column charts. Here you've got different kinds of line charts or pie charts, whatever. So I'm going to choose a line chart, And you'll see that depending on which type of line chart I pick, it gives me some previews for what my data might look like. Right? So I have stacked line, regular line, 100% stacked line, line with markers, etc. So I'll choose line with markers. And what's nice about this is once I pick the subcategory, like line with markers, if I bring my cursor down here, it previews my data for me. All right, so I'll pick that, then OK. And you'll see it converts it over to a line chart fairly easily for me. All right, and everything else stays intact. My axis labels are still there. My category labels are still there. My chart title is still there. All of that is still where we would hope it is. So that's a way that we can set that up. In terms of the pros and cons of the different kinds of charts, that's really up to you. And one of the nice things about Excel is that you can play around with the different types of charts and see what works best for your data. Right? So I wanted to look at a scatter plot. Okay, that's very different than a column chart. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. With a scatter plot, what you're often going to want to do is add a trend line. And so to add a trend line, again, design, all the way on the left, you're going to choose add chart element. One of your options is trend line. And then you've got a number of different types of trend lines, right, depending on how you want them to be calculated. This is up to you. So let's say I'm going to choose linear. Since I have 3 data series here, it's going to let me pick which one I want to create a trend line for. Let's say I want to do trial 3. I click OK, and there's my trend line. Right now it's going to change the scale a little bit, but that's okay. And I can try the different types of trend lines for the different trials. Right, so there's an exponential trend line for trial 2, for example. All right. So again, number of different options, fairly easy to change midstream. So once you pick a chart type, you're not necessarily committed to it. You can always change. You can always add more elements later, as long as you have a good understanding of where everything is in Excel.